Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 14 of our reading of Alfred Hitchcock Presents Stories Not for the Nervous, and we will be reading more in the story Dune Roller by, I believe it was Julian May. Anyways, but before that, let's go over the copyright information. It clearly says here, the author gratefully acknowledges the invaluable assistance of Robert Arthur in the preparation of this volume. This gives all the publication histories, all the copyright information, and you can read that in your leisure. Also, there will be the acknowledgments. I will not read them aloud, but they will be on the screen, and you can read them in your leisure as well, all throughout this story while I read this. Anyways, in the last part of the story, Dr. Thorne, well, actually, there was this boy that brought up this toad that was dying, and he found these weird teardrop-shaped things that looked like they had tails. And they seemed to be inedible and stuff like that. So I don't know what's going on, but we'll find out. Anyways, this is going to be the acknowledgments. But anyways, we're going to pick up where we left off. Okay, so he wanted to show his friend, but he lives in Ann Arbor. Okay. Idly, Thorne toyed with the idea of sending the pair of drops to his old friend. They were unusual looking. He could leave the label on, write a cryptic note, and fix Seppel's clock for putting the minnows in his larva pail on their last field trip together. If he hurried, he could get the drops off tonight. There was a train for Port Grand in 45 minutes. As for the storm, it was still a long ways off. He doubted that it would break before nightfall and the activity would do him good. He found a small box and prepared it for the mails. Where was that book of stamps? The letter to Seppel. He slipped a sheet of paper into the typewriter and tapped rapidly. String. Where was the string? Ah, there it was, in the magazine rack. Now a slicker, and be sure the windows and doors are locked. His Jeep was in a shed at the bottom of the dune, protected by a thick scrub of cottonwood and cedar. Since there was no door, Thorne had merely to reverse gears, shoot out, swing around, and roar over the improvised stone drive to the hard, wet sand of the beach. 5 miles down the shore was an overgrown, but still usable wagon trail, which led to the highway. The clouds were closing ranks in the west as Dr. Thorne and his Jeep appeared over the crest of the tall dune. Mr. Gimpy Zandbergen, gentleman of leisure, late of the high seas, and presently of the open road, was going home. During a long and motley life, Mr. Zandbergen had wandered far from his native lakes to sail on the more boisterous waters, but now his days as an oiler were over, and there came into his heart a nostalgic desire to see the fruit boats ship out of Port Grand once more. Since he possessed neither the money nor a bus ticket home, nor the ambition to work to obtain it, he pursued his way via freight car and such rides as he was able to hook from kindly disposed truck drivers. His late ride had carried him to a point on the shore highway some miles south of his goal, at which he was regrettably disputed the intrinsic worth of the Detroit Tigers and had been invited to continue his journey on foot. But Mr. Zandenberg was a simple soul, so he merely shrugged his shoulders, fortified himself from the bottle in his pocket and trudged along. It was hot, though, as only Michigan in August can be, and the sun baked the concrete and reflected off the sand hills at the side of the road. He paused, pulled a blue bandana handkerchief from his pocket, and mopped his balding head under his cap. He thought longingly of the cool dune path which he knew lay on the other side of the forest toward the lake. It had been a long time, but he remembered it. It would lead to Port Grand and the fruit boats, and would be refreshingly cool. When the storm came, Mr. Zandbergen was distinctly put out. He had not seen the gathering storm through the thick branches, and when the sky darkened, he assumed that it was merely one of the common summer sun showers, and hoped for a quick clearing. He was disturbed when the big drops continued to pelt him out between the smaller and less sheltered evergreens. He swore as the path ended high on a scrubby hill. Lightning cut the black clouds, and Mr. Zandbergen broke into a lope. He had taken the wrong turning. He knew that now, but he recognized the shore. He dimly remembered a driftwood shanty which lay near an old wagon road somewhere around here. If he made that, he might not get too wet after all. He could see the lake now. The wind was raging and tearing at the waves, whipping the once placid waters of Michigan into black fury. Mr. Zandbergen shuddered in the driving rain and fled headlong down a dune. Great crashes of thunder deafened him, and he could hardly see where was that road. A huge sheet of lightning lit the sky as it struggled to top the next dune. There it was. The road was down there, and trees, and the shanty too. He went diagonally along the dune in gigantic leaps, dodging the storm-racked trees and bushes. The wind lulled, then blasted the branches down ferociously, catching him a stinging blow across the face. He tripped and, with an agonizing howl, began to roll straight down the bare face of the sand hill. He landed in a prickly juniper hedge and lay whimpering and cursing weakly, while the rain and wind pounded him. The greenery ripped from the trees stung into his vision. The greenery ripped from the trees stung into stung into him viciously as he tried to rise, gave up, and tried again. On the black beach, several hundred feet away, waves leaped and stretched into the sky. Then came another lull, and a light appeared out in the lake. It rose and fell in the surf, and a few moments the flattened, horrified little man on the shore could see what it was. A solemn thunderclap drowned out his scream of terror. Shouting wordless things, he stumbled, swaying to his feet and clawing through the bushes to fall out onto the road. It saw him. He was sure it saw him. He struggled along on his knees in the sand for a short distance before he fell for the last time. The wind shrilled again in the trees, but the fury of the storm had finally passed. The rain fell down steadily now on the sodden sand dunes and dripped off the cottonwood branches onto the quiet form of Mr. Zandbergen, who would not see the fruit boats go out again after all. The sheriff was a conversational man. "Now, I've lived on this lake for 40 years, he said to Thorne, "but never did I see a storm like today's. No, sir." He turned to his subordinate standing beside him. "Regular typhoon, eh, Sam? I guess we won't be forgetting that one in a hurry." Dr. Thorne, at any rate, would not forget it. He could still hear in his mind the thunder as it had rolled away off over the dunes, and see the flaring white cones of his headlights cutting out his way through the rain. He had gone slowly over the sliding wet sand of the wagon road on the way home, but even at that, he had almost missed seeing it. He remembered how he had thought it was a fallen branch at first, and how he had gotten out of the car then and stood in the rain looking at it before he wrapped his slicker around it and drove back to town. And now the rain had stopped at last, and the office of the Port Grand physician, who was the county medical examiner, was neat, dim, and stuffy, with the smell of pharmaceuticals and wet raincoats. Over the other homely odors hung the stench of burnt flesh. Snip went the physician's bandage shears. Through charred cloth, Thorne lit a cigarette and inhaled, but the sharp, sickening other smell remained in his nostrils. According to this Seamen's International card, he was George Zandbergen of Port Grand, said the sheriff to Sam, who carefully transcribed the information in his notebook. To Thorne, he said, "Did you know him, mister?" Thorne shook his head. "I remember him, Peter," said the physician experimentally, determining the stiffness of the dead fingers before him. Appendicitis in 1946. Left town after that. I think he used to be an oiler on the Josephine Temple in the Fruit Fleet. I'll have a file on him. Oh, I'll have a file on him around here somewhere. Get that, Sam," said the sheriff. He turned to Thorne, standing awkwardly on the foot of the examination table. "We'll have to take your story for the record, of course. I hope this won't take too long. Start at the beginning, please." Gulping down his nervousness and revulsion, Thorne told of returning from town about 9 o'clock and finding the corpse of a man lying in the middle of a deserted side road. Dr. Thorne recalled puzzling at the condition of the body, for although it had been storming heavily at the time, portions of the body had been burned quite black. Thorne had found something at the scene also, but failing to see that it had any connection with the matter at hand, prudently kept his discovery to himself. The sheriff would hardly be interested in it, he told himself, but nevertheless he hoped that the bulge it made in his pocket wasn't too noticeable. Officer Sam Stern made the last little tipped Y. Made the last little tipped V that stood for a period in his transcription, and looked nervously about him. His chief peered approvingly, even if uncomprehensively, at the notes and said, "How does it look, Doctor?" "Third-degree burns on 50% of the body area, searing to the bone in some parts of the face and about the right scapula." "How did you say he was lying when you found him, Mr. Thorne?" "In an unnatural kind of sprawled position on the right side." The physician yawned, rummaged in a cabinet, and produced a sheet, with which he covered the charred body. "Pretty obvious, Peter, with these burns and all. Verdict is accidental death. The poor devil was struck by lightning. Time of death was about 8 p.m. He tucked the sheet securely around the head. "That lightning's pretty odd stuff now. It can blow the soles off a man's shoes without scratching him, or generate enough heat to melt metal. You never know what tricks it's going to play. Take this guy here. One side of him's boiled black, and the other's not even singed. Well, you never know, do you?" He picked up his phone and conversed briefly with the local undertaking parlor, where negotiations were being for the disposition of the unfortunate Mr. Zandbergen had been completed. He replaced the receiver and shuffled toward the door. Thorne could see that he had bedroom slippers on under his rubbers, which I think are boots. "You can finish up tomorrow, Peter," he resumed. My wife was kind of peeved at me coming out this way. You know how women are. Ha ha. Good night to you, Mr. Thorne. I think there's an old overcoat in that closet I could let you take. You'll be wanting to send yours to the cleaners. There was a genial guffaw from the sheriff. We won't keep you any longer tonight, Mr. Thorne. Just let me know how I can get in touch with you. Though through Kurt McInes on River Road, said Thorne. He'll be glad to contact me through his amateur station. He edged through the door into the quiet night. The sheriff came close behind. So you're a ham, eh? He said warmly. Well, can you tie that? I used to have a ticket myself in the old days. Polite noises. How about that? Kindred souls. Sorry about all the sloppy business, old man. Tough luck. You had to be the one to find him. Really nothing, old man. Why don't you stop talking? The weight in Thorne's pocket seemed to grow. You know, I'll be dropping in to see your rig sometime. Wait a minute. You know, I'll be dropping in to see your rig some one of these days. If you don't mind, I'll bet you could use a little company out there in the dunes, eh? No, why should he mind? Delighted, old man. Any time at all. The thing in his pocket seemed to sag to his ankles. It would rip the pocket and fall out, and it had bits of charred cloth on it. Why didn't they go? They couldn't possibly suspect that he hadn't. Oh, yes, he was on 10 meters. Oh, yes, he was on 10 meters. Phone. Oh, the sheriff had done CW on 180. Well, wasn't that nice? They walked to the cars under the big old elm trees that lined the comfortable street. A few stars came out and down where the streets dead-ended into the river. They could see lights moving toward the deep water channel that connected the river with the lake. Well, good night, Sheriff, Thorne said. Good night, Mr. Stern. I hope next time we'll meet under more pleasant circumstances. Good night, Mr. Thorne, said Sam, who was thoroughly bored with talk. He didn't understand and anxious to get home to his wife and baby. The police got into their car and drove off. Thorne sat quietly behind the wheel of the Jeep until he was sure they were gone, then gingerly removed the weight from his pocket and unwrapped the handkerchief that covered it. This one was the size of a closed fist and irregular in shape. He had found it flattened under the black char that had once been a man's shoulder, glowing with a bright yellow light in its heart. It looked the same as the 3 small drops he had previously seen, but he saw that what he had mistaken for golden flecks inside it was really a fine network of metallic threads which formed a web apparently embedded a few centimeters below the thing's surface. The darn thing, he thought, there was something funny about it, all right. Around him, the lights of the quiet houses were going out one by one. It was 11 o'clock, and a few wet patches still glistened on the street under the lamps, and a boat motor on the river pulsed, then stilled. Thorne looked around him quickly, then got out of his car and laid the thing on the curb. The wet leaves in the gutter below it reflected yellow faintly. It was funny that a mere matter of shape could change his feeling towards it so radically. The smaller drops had been rather beautiful in their drop-like mystery, but this one, although it was made of the same wonderful stuff, had none of the beauty. The irregular cavity in its side that would fit a human shoulder blade made it a thing sinister. The dry blood and ashes made it monstrous. He took the tire iron out of the toolkit and tapped the glowing thing experimentally. It was certainly stronger than it looked. At any rate, when harder taps failed to crack it, he raised the iron and brought it down with all his strength. The tool bounced, skidded, and chipped the concrete curbstone, but the thing flew undamaged into the gutter. Thorne bent down and poked it incredulously, and suddenly, with a cry of agony, he dropped the tire iron. It was hot. The tool arced down and lay sizzling sullenly among the little drops of water that still clung to the grass blades. His hand, still clutching his teeth, he clutched his hand. He clutched his teeth to keep from crying out. But the glowing thing in the gutter was not hot. Steam rose from the iron in the grass, but the little rivulets bathing the glowing thing were cool. He seemed to remember something, but then the shock numbness coming over his hand took his attention, and he forgot it again. Down among the leaves and trash, the thing that was not shattered by the strength of Dr. Thorne grew momentarily, more golden, and with a deliberate liquid ripple, the ugly bulges on its surface smoothed, and it assumed the perfect drop shape of its predecessors. Okay, 200,000 AU plus plenty watts. Tell me, pretty maiden, are there any more at home like you? Arrive noon, Thursday, love, Sepel. You think you're pretty smart, don't you? Said Thorne. Yes, said Willie Sepel, smugly, smirking around the edge of his beer. He put down the glass, and the smirk expanded to a grin. Smart enough to see what those drops were that you sent me for a gag. That was a great little trick of yours, you know. I was all set to throw them out after reading that note of yours. The only thing that saved them was Archie Deck. He thought they might be Prince Rupert's drops and tried to crack the tail off with a file. Aha, said Dr. Thorne. Dr. Thorne, okay. Sepel looked at him with bright blue innocent eyes. He was a large, pink-faced, elegantly dressed man with an eagle beak nose and a crown of fine blonde hair. You don't have to look at me like that, said Thorne. I've been able to find out a little bit more about them myself. Tell me, said the pink-faced complacently. They generate heat, and I found out the same way as Archie Deck probably did. He gestured with one bandaged hand. Only I managed it the hard way. He swept up the empty glasses and beer bottles with a crash and disappeared into the kitchen. His voice continued distantly. I found those two I sent to you inside the stomach of a toad, or at least what was left of the stomach of a toad. Look at the lab room, the big shelf. Second bottle from the end on the right-hand side. Wiping his good hand on his trousers, he returned to Sepel, who stood looking thoughtfully into the toad's bottle. It ate the drops, Thorne said shortly. Yes, he mused. The digestive juices might very possibly be able to... Come on, Willie. What is it? You were almost right when you said it generated heat, Willie said. I brought one of them here to show you. He left the room and returned a minute with a large cowhide briefcase. The thing's in a couple of pieces, Chappelle apologized. You'll have to wait until I get it up. Have you got a step-down transformer? Thorne nodded and fetched it from the bookcase. Now the little drops here may look like a bead, but it has some singular properties. He removed the thing from a box, which had been heavily sealed and padded, and set it in a nest of gray woolly stuff in the middle of the table. It gives off long infrared, mostly stacked. It gives off long infrared, mostly stacked up around 200,000 angstroms, but their energy is way out of proportion for what you'd expect for the equilibrium. This little gadget is something Deck and I rigged up to measure it crudely. Essentially, it's a TC-130X couple hooked up to a spring gun. You put the drop in here, regulate the tension of the spring, and firing the gun releases this rod, which delivers the drop and appropriate smack. His fingers, with their immaculate groomed nails, worked deftly. We don't get a controlled measurement, of course, but I'll show you what I mean. Why did you hide your outlets? Behind the fish tank. Be careful not to disconnect the aerator. The screen on that end will show you the energy output. Watch now. We are going to have to stop it here. It's been over 26 minutes. We have been reading from Alfred Hitchcock Presents, Stories Not for the Nervous. If you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, or if you want to join the Discord server, then all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.